All right. I'm not seeing a lot of enthusiasm to our icebreaker today. I'm sure that everyone is just ready to get into the work of today. Our lesson plan for today will be starting now with Module 2, Violence Prevention Theory and Methodology. I'm not alone in the room as per last week. I do have colleagues joining me, and I have two colleagues who will quickly introduce themselves as well. We will turn on our cameras briefly just so you can see all of our faces, and then two of our new colleagues will give a brief intro before we move on. Thulani, you can introduce yourself since you're joining us for the first time.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here, and I'm excited for the workshop today. My name is Thulani Manzi, working for the PUU, and I work as a data collection manager. I work with data on the ground. Thank you.
Petang, you're also a new face.
Morning, everyone. My name is Petang Mabiba, and I'm also with VPU as the ECD lead, Early Childhood Development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we can switch off our cameras now. We'll be starting with Module 2 from 10 minutes past 10 until 11, Violence Prevention Theory and Methodology. And then after that, we'll have a short 10-minute break, as we did last week. And then we'll move on to evidence and discussion around examples from 10 minutes past 11. And then at 15 minutes past 12, we'll be doing a reflection, an appetizer, and a closure. That is our lesson plan for today. I will now be handing over to Michael. You will remember Michael from last week, who is one of our facilitators. I'll be handing over to him. I don't need to introduce him again this week. I'm sure a lot of you will recognize him from last week. Thank you all.
Thanks very much, Fiona, for the kind introduction. I just want to remind people, now that you know that everybody, I hope everybody can access the chat. If anybody can't access the chat, please raise your hand. And those who can access the chat, please introduce yourself on the chat. It's really helpful for everybody to know who's in the meeting, and also for recording purposes, it might be quite helpful. So I would like to continue and welcome everybody for today's session. It's great that you took the time. I know it's a big commitment to take quite a chunk out of your busy week for the violence prevention theory and methodology that we're continuing today. As Fiona has said, it will be a little bit of a more interactive session today. With Petang and Thulani, we've got two colleagues that will talk about their particular experiences in violence and crime prevention. One example about early childhood development, and one example from Thulani about the security of tenure and informal settlements. I will start it off a little bit with what we call the sneak preview of the discussion we want to have after the break. After the break means after we've given the majority of our content input. We would like to have about 45 minutes of conversation amongst the participants, amongst us as practitioners, and hence I would like to explain it a little bit. So if you are interested, you can almost like prepare yourself for the conversation at the end. Beyond those two examples and the reflection, we'll go into the institutionalization of violence and crime prevention, and a little bit around evidence. But what's really important for us today is that we as colleagues and as practitioners start to talk to each other and how the information that has been shared is actually landing with us. So as such, we would like to do a group discussion after the break with everybody in the room. So we invite people because we can see that we got colleagues from various spheres of life. So we got colleagues from national government, from provincial government, from local government, and from CSOs, primarily 1 or 2 from research institutions, which is also great. We would subordinate you all under CSO, under civil society organizations, so please don't feel disregarded or disrespected. And we would like to discuss ideally about 2 projects that you have and that you basically run in your own organizations. The ideal would be, and sometimes you have that in the last meeting, we looked at the participants who was participating in the conversation last week. We could see that there's a municipality and there's a CSO and you're working together, or there's a provincial government and there's a local government and you're working together. So we were hoping that we probably have 1 or 2 partnerships here in the room, and would people like to reflect on their project and how it fits into the conversations we are having over the last 2 weeks. So ideally, we would like to have a short introduction into the project by one of the experts, one of our colleagues here from you. So if you're saying I would be happy to introduce my project, please do so after the break, and give a little bit of who are the partners, who is working on it, and what are we trying to do. So we're not expecting a PowerPoint presentation or a presentation, anything up on the screen. It's really introducing it with a couple of words. And I hope that you are the person whoever does that needs to be brave. As the group will give some feedback, so it is you making yourself vulnerable, and I hope that people are willing to do that. So if you want to be in the hot seat and want to share your project, we would like to ask you to WhatsApp the following number, which we will also post into the chat now that the chat is fully functional. So the number is 061 345 0877. So that WhatsApp number sits with us here. I'll repeat it a little bit later, so don't worry. But if you would like to, and Iris put it already in the chat, so if you would like to put up your project in a very short, distinct manner and say, let's work through it as a group, explain it, and then we work through it. So how do we want to go through that project and reflect on the project? So we would like to reflect it in line with what we were talking over the last couple of sessions by that time. And it's really around on the violence and crime prevention intervention on the 3 types of violence. I will go through that again in my review. So if you've forgotten them, and I'm sure you all got them, the direct, the cultural, and the structural violence. So maybe you can think about, how does my project relate to those 3 types? Which one am I addressing? And then also the socio-ecological model, which I think all of us are familiar. Which spheres are we of influence are we targeting? So that could be the individual, that could be the family or the small group, that could be the neighborhood or the community, or it could be the society at large. And clearly would like to understand what is your project targeting, which types of violence, and maybe you're cognizant, maybe you're not cognizant of that. And actually the conversation we are having over the last 2 weeks assists in framing that. For us, partnerships is very important. And if you look at the ABVPI, it says, well, partnerships is a very, very important thing. So for us, it would be good to understand, who are you partnering in your project in order to meet the goals of your intervention? And the last question is, are you measuring or are you monitoring, and what are you monitoring that? And we know that crime and violence prevention is often a very difficult matter to monitor, because, for instance, the police statistics are one part of it, but often they don't reflect on a very particular level. It's very difficult to extract from police statistics, and we know not all of the crime and violence is actually reflected in the police statistics. So we're looking for innovative ways. What are you looking at? What are you monitoring? What are you measuring? And that's not in order to say there's wrong or right approaches. It's actually to share innovation and sometimes it's very basic. Some of the basic things to basically share that with us as the participants. So those are the three questions. And Iris will probably, Iris will put it in the chat, or are we putting it for the people? Yeah, we put it in the chat, yeah, as well, the three questions. So if you're still interested, and I hope there's two people that, or two groups that are interested, we would like to have two conversations if possible. You can still WhatsApp us under the number 061 345 0877. Okay, and with that, I'm going back into the recap of the last week's session. We got very few, I think 2 or 3, I counted 2 or 3 new members. So for you, it's like a bit of a speed dating. For the others, it's just a reflection of what we did last week. So last week, we spoke about the framing of in which context are we working and operating when we talk about crime and violence prevention. And our country is unfortunately an unequal country, or unequal country, and we understand that inequality is an important risk factor that can lead to crime and violence. We also know that the areas of poverty and deprivation are more likely prone to interpersonal violence. We also know that South Africa is one of the most violent countries in the world, and also one of the most unequal ones, with a Gini coefficient of 65 points. And we know high inequality is perpetuating by the legacy of exclusion. But we also know, unfortunately, in our country, we have intergenerational, a very low intergenerational mobility, and at the same time, an intergenerational experiences of trauma. If you just look and reflect of the history that the country went through in the last couple of centuries. So meaning that the inequalities are actually passed down from one generation to the next. And I think we need to be mindful of that and not say you can redo and undress, as people say sometimes in a very quick period. We're actually dealing with the root causes and not just with the symptoms. And we also see that, unfortunately, the gap is widening over the last couple of years of the haves and the have-nots. And we also spoke about that the have-nots are actually on average indebted. So that is all compounding deprivations that we have. We spoke about the 3 types of violence, of the direct violence, that's often the visible violence, the high crime rates, etc., and impact of that on visualization of that. We spoke about cultural violence and structural violence. And we also spoke about that underneath all of that is the unhealed trauma. And that's very much like the inherited deprivation, and it's sent down or passed down from one generation to the other. So we really have to break that cycle of deprivation in order to deal with the high levels of crime in the country. So more police on the street won't resolve the issue. It's really a conversation within the society that needs to happen. So how can we contribute to that as a collective? We identified 3 types of strategies, prevention strategies that we can embark on. And that's through the built environment, so you can change the physical environment. Typical examples are crime prevention through environmental design, or SEPTED, which we call the situational crime prevention. We can deal with the relation between the offender and the victim. So how is that relationship between the offender and the victim? And that's primarily through the social crime prevention. And I know that many of us here in the room got a wealth of experience of various social crime prevention interventions. And we shouldn't lose track of the 3rd element, and that's really the power relations. And that's so important, and that's the institutional crime prevention. So today, when Thulani describes his intervention that he leads, or one of the interventions he leads, he will go into that institutional crime prevention as an example, how we can deal with it. We also spoke that all of that is embedded somehow in our townships, and the picture I'm showing is just a depiction of that, of the various types of violence, and that you actually need to have a comprehensive approach of all three strategies. Your situation, you need to change the built environment, you need to see social change, and you need to see a change of the power relationship so that you get a more equal society. Same area, and we were basically able in that particular setting in Khayelitsha to turn a wasteland into one of the nicest parts that's well utilized. So those brings those three elements together. We then spoke about the triangle of violence. That basically said if you want to, one needs to be cognizant of the relationship of the offender and the victim, but also of the location and the place. And we looked in particular in the hotspot mapping. And we identified that in the hotspot mapping, there are 3 different types of hotspot, geographic hotspots that we got. We got the dot, and I think an example was a typical through-let from one area into the other, which is easy, which become where a pedestrian becomes a very easy target for a potential offender. We spoke about a line, which could be a pedestrian walkway, which could be along a road that's a high street or something like that, or along a motorway, etc. And we spoke about an area or about areas as well. And each of those geographical hotspots require slightly different interventions. And it could be scale, but also strategy, how to approach certain things. And we also spoke about that those hotspots also have typologies. And again, those typologies are embedded in the triangle of violence, the place, the victim, and the offender. So an area or a particular hotspot could be a crime generator, could be a crime attractor, or could be an enabler. We went through a couple of examples where we see an overlap of the line, the particular that was a hotspot, a line hotspot, which then got turned into a positive and much safer pedestrian walkway. Lots of passive surveillance, so that the 3 elements, the 3 interventions, the situational, the built environment, the social crime prevention, as well as the institutional was addressed in order to make it. But then also we had the line, and we had within the line, we had to recall that Harare Square, we also had an area which got turned from a not so safe area into a much safer area, and a mix of interventions and users to make it 24/7 basically user-friendly and activated. So that's important that we activate our spaces, that we have passive surveillance, and there's a mix of users and a mix of activities that take place. And that allowed us to make the area safer. We spoke about the principles of the crime prevention through environmental design, and many experts here in the group that know about that. We identified 7, the surveillance and visibility, the own spaces, defined access and safe movement routes, the image and aesthetics, the physical barriers, and obviously the whole question around urban management, operation, maintenance, and management, and the inclusive design. So we had the second part of the previous session was particular one lens that was taken on, and that was the lens of gender. How do we do inclusive design for gender? But there's also other types of inclusive design that's included in that principle of the septet. That could be for children, that could be for people with different abilities, etc., etc. So I would like us to be mindful and open-minded when we talk about inclusive design, to think about the groups that are marginalized, that there is a positive experience of those marginalized groups in the spaces that we design for our citizens in the country. We went into social crime prevention, and we spoke about the methodology and the theory of the socio-ecological model and the four levels: the individual level, the relationship or the family level, the community or the neighborhood level, and the society at large, or it could be the city level, or could be the provincial level, and so the overall. And we also understood that different typologies of interventions are required, for each of those levels to address it. And then we went into the risk and protective factors, and we repeated some of the risk factors, which is the inequality, which we said is in the context. So that's really the context we live in. And we reiterated it's so important for each of our projects to identify risk factors before we start an intervention, not afterwards or during. They may change during the intervention, but be mindful what are you, in which context are we working. And so identify the risk factors. There's a list, there's a long list. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, but just see what is appropriate and then validate it with the people that we're working with. And then into there, we went into protective factors, and you can see the protective factors. We aligned to the 4 levels of the socio-ecological model, your individual, your family, your community, and the society at large. And you can see that different interventions are tailored to those to those different levels. So the job skills intervention, for instance, or education is targeted at individuals to improve all the experience of the individual, to strengthen their supportive factors and protective factors as an individual, to be resilient against risk factors. On a family level, it might be a psychosocial support that you're giving, or you're fostering children's social and cognitive skills, and that would be an intervention between early childhood development practitioners and your parenting skills. So that's in the family. You basically live a model, and you have those positive role models in your family, which is a protective factor towards potential risk of becoming a victim or becoming an offender yourself. And then in the community, as you can imagine, as you go higher up in the levels, it becomes more difficult to identify the cause and the impact that you cause, because if you want to talk about non-violent values, that is a very broad and a very long-term intervention that you have, but it doesn't mean don't start it. It means start it and reiterate. It's really, there we're looking at behavioral changes at community level, and it takes time. It is around building social capital, and it's around building those partnerships that we will talk a little bit later, and hopefully will come out in the case studies as well. And then last, if you look at the institutional society at all, there we're talking about changing the law, etc., changing cultural norms. It's around transparency and accountability and so forth. And we gave a couple of examples last time when we talk about the integrated crime and violence prevention strategy, which is actually the guiding document and such a rich and good document. As you can see in that document, again, it goes through all the 4 levels. We spoke about intersectionality, and I think you got the perspective of two. You got 2 perspectives. It's a very, very, very good tool to bring the social capital within one community to light. So I really encourage people to use that in your work, because it really looks at what types of privilege or discrimination are we exposed to as individuals and as the community at large. And you can see a couple of potential filters that you can use: race, ethnicity, gender identity, class, language, religion, ability, sexuality, mental health, age, education, and body size. I'm sure you can add to that. And then under the GBV, we looked particular at one lens, how would it look if it was on gender-based violence. What I personally like about that intersectionality is that it actually looks on both sides. It is looking at everybody, and in each community, whether it is an informal settlement, whether it's a gang area, whether it's an affluent area, we are privileged, and we just need to identify and visualize what are the privileges each of us has. But then also we are discriminated, and some are more discriminated than others. So I think it's that balance that's important to see. The danger I see with the model is, or one needs to be mindful that we don't use that model the intersectionality, if you use it as an exercise in a marginalized community, to unintended entrench the marginalization and oppression. Because if you go into a community and basically identify all the things are negative in your community, I think that's not a good start, because then we end up being at the helper syndrome. And I would like to guard us against the idea that we need to come and solve other people's problems. I think it's important that we work in partnership. So for me, that intersectionality model allows that, because it allows us to be part of a community and work with a community as much as it allows a community to also say, these are the elements, and other people will use the asset-based community development approach, the ABCD. I'm sure all of us are familiar with that. That also looks what are the assets in the community. And that's the beauty of the model here, of that intersectionality, that you can actually merge the two and say we have two sides of a coin. We then spoke about what makes an ABVPI, the Area-Based Violence Prevention Initiative, for those who are not so familiar with the abbreviations, for a safer community. And you can see what it in essence says. It is a holistic, comprehensive, integrated approach. What we didn't touch on so much the last time is the institutionalization, which we'll talk a little bit more today. But you can see the various elements. And then we rounded it off with the Integrated Crime and Violence Prevention Strategy, which started off as the white paper with the 6 themes, which are so important, which then got pulled through the ICVPS, the Integrated Crime and Violence Prevention Strategy. I'm sure we are familiar with the 6 themes. Those are victim support, early interventions, effective and integrated service delivery for safety, security, and violence and crime prevention, safety through environmental design, effective criminal and judicial system, and then the active public and community participation. So the partnership, again, is embedded here. And that's basically where we rounded it off. I didn't want to take too much time from my side, but maybe there are some comments or questions from the people that were in the meeting last week, or of the newcomers, which you would like to touch on in particular before we move on with 2 case studies or 2 expert inputs from Petang and from Thulani. So I'm opening the mic, so if people would like to have some comments or questions, please identify yourself. Okay, colleagues, I can see there are no hands, so it was clear as mud. That's great to hear, so that was very clear. And the newcomers, congratulations, you got the speed dating into the theories and methodologies of violence and crime prevention. There's no test at the end, but I would like to encourage people to raise their hand and allow us to talk about your intervention. So far, you haven't had any response on the WhatsApp line. Please keep it coming. Please don't be shy. Don't be shy. Please come in. So I'm handing back to Fiona, who introduces our 2 colleagues.
Hi again, everyone. I will take this time to introduce Petang, who will be taking the first portion of the conversation on, and then I will later introduce Thulani to you. So Petang has been with VPUU for 5 years now. She first joined the organization as a project manager, looking after ISSP in Caledon and Port River, and the Youth Cafe in Villiers-Stone, whilst providing support on precinct management and activations. Petang is now an ECD lead at VPUU, who is responsible for the ongoing crafting of strategic direction of the AOE and exploring growth opportunities aligned to organizational goals. Petang is interested in the betterment of an African child and loves being part of a solution. Over to you, Petang.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Fiona. Is this camera on?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm sitting at Michael's computer. So my name's not Michael. As Fiona said, my name is Patang, and I'm the ECD lead at VPU. Let me just. It's not moving. Sorry, guys. Okay, there we go. So, as we mentioned, at VPU, why ECD? And I think really the essence of it all is really to ensure that all children, basically every child, has access to quality ECD services, regardless of where you are. We also follow a socio-ecological model. You can see on this diagram that is on your screen at the moment. In our context, we look at the child when we talk about the individual scale, moving further into our teachers and caregivers. When we look at the relations, because that's the immediate relation that we have, obviously parents as well. We then look at the neighborhood scale, in which we also engage with the ECD forum, but I'll talk a bit more into that. And citywide scale, looking at what other initiatives or programs or anything basically within society exist in that space to further enhance what we're trying to do within ECD to ensure that quality ECD is being received. What we also do is follow a population approach, and what we've done with this is we've linked our ECD programs to communal spaces and walkways. So yeah, as I get into this, you'll further understand what I mean by this. So partnerships are very, very important to us, and nurturing those partnerships as well with the community as well as with community structures is how we basically get our work done as an underlying fundamental step. We consult local leadership basically, and this includes also ECD forums. Just to explain and introduce to them the concept of what we mean by a population approach, what programs are we bringing into the community and how this will benefit them. We partner with the local ECD centers. So we have written ECDC, please note that that's ECD centers. This includes also the local ECD forum in the area, but any other NGOs that are working or community organizations really that are working in the space, basically with the same vision around ECD or similar vision so that we can work together. And for us, those partnerships are really important. So we'd workshop a strategy so that we're not working in silos and kind of all feeding towards the same destination with our different resource inputs. We then identify our beneficiaries, and this is done in partnership with what Thulani also will get into, what we call enumeration. And through that, we can then basically understand which children would be registered under our VPU programs. Obviously, we're not expecting all of them because this is taking cognizance that there are existing ECD centers operating in this space. So those who can afford to pay for ECD services in this instance would be attending those, but in our when I say this is VPU program in some people can't afford, so some would then fall into our outreach programs that I'll further explain. Computer, that's not mine. Excuse me. This is an example of our outreach and out of center program, which is an ECD resource center, also known as a toy library. What happens here is this is a shared resource really for the various ECD centers within the community. So they all have access to a physical space, the educational resources in the center, but also have access to our trained field workers to support implementation of ECD programs in their respective centers. The toy library basically operates, it's guided by a curriculum. So we use the Unlimited Child. I should have actually written that out. But we use the Unlimited Child curriculum. So there's so many ECD curriculums, but this is the one we have partnered with to help enhance what's happening in the space. How am I doing this? There we go. Okay. Another part of our outreach and out of center programs is what we call Emthonjeni. Emthonjeni being obviously the direct translation of the water source. What we've done is around the communal taps in the informal settlement, we've paved the area, given it a little bit of a bench or just to make it a little bit more user-friendly than just the random tap standing in the middle of nowhere. And that becomes our out-of-center classroom, if I could put it that way. So our field workers, who are often funded through EPWP or also Social Employment Fund, they basically would take whatever resources they need from the Toy Library Resource Center and go and set up classroom, as you can see in that little image at the bottom there, at the taps, so that children then also have access to ECD programs in that space, regardless of whether there's a building or not. This also works as a skills development program for us because the EPWP, well, the field workers really are there for 12 months at a time. Obviously, due to the restrictions of EPWP funding or on a fixed term contract. And through that, they go through trainings and are able to then implement whatever programs they do. On the previous slide, I mentioned that they also support the ECD centers in their respective centers. So they would do regular visits to the centers so that they also can basically guide them on how to better use the tools that they have, but also just be supportive in this crucial developmental stage for the child. This is super important because, again, we have a lot of centers, especially in our townships, not speaking badly of them because a lot of us are products of such centers, where a lot of mamas have just opened up a center as a means of making an income, but not necessarily had the necessary training or, are not aware of those crucial developmental stages. So it's very important to be able to get some form of training or guidance in this sense to support their efforts, really. We also run an in-center service, which this now is a registered ECD center, Tandiswa Educare. And here it's registered with the Department of Education. It is a fee-paying service, unlike the first two that I showed you, also guided by the Unlimited Child. And I think why I keep on linking that link to the Unlimited Child is to show that what we've done with the out-of-center program, what we're doing with the different ECD centers, and what we're doing in a regular ECD center, in essence, the child who goes through any of those services gets to grade R, gets to the next phase of life, basically being school ready in the same way. So that's what I'm talking about. But also in terms of training, like I said, a lot of people start centers not necessarily had training, so it's also important to have some people be exposed to some form of ECD training, some form of it. What we also do is we work in partnership with the various FET colleges for, you could say, an incubation of interns. So yeah, the various, every year we have 1 or 2, sometimes 3 interns coming to do their in-service training at the space. So in these images, I'm just showing you what our classrooms look like, but in essence, it's just to show you what we've done in a space that is also an informal settlement. Give them a proper playground, give them a little bit of garden space, which also then acts as an extension to their classroom so that they are able to not only have class inside, under a roof and stuff like that, but also be exposed to other forms of life and regardless of the hardships of the township. More partnership stories. As I said, we work closely with the ECD Forum, currently working with ECD forums across 8 areas. But the reason why we do this is really because as VPUU, we come into a space, and I could say as foreigners. So it's important to work with people who are already there to help us understand the landscape in that community. It is an opportunity, it raises an opportunity really for us to do things as a collective, as opposed to ECD centers raising issues, something as individuals. Power of Community, but also through our partnerships and whatever we have access to and everything that we can do as a collective, we empower staff through provision of various trainings. The Unlimited Child has been good at this. We've offered some first aid trainings. We've done some in-house trainings on like robust data collection systems. And again, this is important again, because going back to that mama who opened up a center as a means of income, a lot of the time she does not have things like child profile forms in her center, or takes record of what activities she's doing with the children on a daily basis. So now we're able to basically help her, or him sometimes, very seldom, but him, have a more formalized way of being able to present the information of her ECD center regarding which children are staying in there, takes a regular register of which children are present that day, but also takes note of what activities basically they've managed to cover in that day, year, and be able to reflect on that moving forward. That will be all for now, but I don't know if there's any questions or observations or comments that anybody would like to raise while I'm still in front of the camera. Thank you.
I'd like to prompt you to please raise your hands if you do have a question, so we may attend to you one by one. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Katang. I'd like to take this opportunity now to introduce Tulani. Tulani has been with VPUU for 10 years now. She started off as a field worker, collecting data on the ground, and then moved to administration and doing desk work. Today, he is a facilitator training field workers on data collection, as well as how to operate technical equipment relating to that work. He is also a data collection manager, overseeing the implementation of different data collection projects within VPUU, as well as managing data collectors across the organization. His passion is being able to interact with different communities and understanding their challenges and living conditions. And he's very happy to be part of the team behind planning and implementing projects that drive improvement in the quality of life for all residents. Over to you, Tulani. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, for that nice introduction. And hello again, everyone. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So what you see in front of you is one of the informal settlement that we currently work on. It's called Monobisi Park. It's situated in Khayelitsha, on the edge of Khayelitsha. So what you see in there, there's a nice picture of the settlement there. And the gray area indicates the original of the settlement when we started working in the settlement. And then you see the different pictures now that you see on the picture because of is the growth, it indicates the growth of the settlement. And also you can see in numbers how significantly the settlement can grow in a short time, in a short period of time. So when you look at the yellow picture you see, that's the growth that started in 2017 to 2018. And there were like around 1,624 structures that were erected in that period of 2017 to 2018. And then you look at the picture that is green, it indicates the growth from 2019, that's between 2018 and 2019. And that growth, it's double the size of the growth that happened in 2018. So there are about 3,300 structures that were erected between the period of 2019. And up to 2021, the settlement has grown now from being 7,000 structures to 14,000 structures for the whole settlement. So that's why we have this kind of system that we implement in these informal settlements, because when this growth happens, it prompts us all sorts of like this three dimension of violence, crime violence. So these are the elements on the top right screen. These are the elements that we focus on when we implement enumeration in the informal settlements. So we look at inclusion of everyone in the settlement when we do enumeration, and just to make sure that everybody in the settlement becomes in a community register, is registered and is known by the local resident or local people of the area. And then the other aspects that we also look into is providing residents with proof of address, which is some form of identification or acknowledgement of the person that is occupying a structure in a settlement somewhere. And also the other aspect that we look into is the growth of the settlement itself and how the settlement has grown from a certain period of time and how many people now it represents. So that's the total structure of settlements, and that gives us the population of the settlement, the population of estimate of the settlement. And then the other things that we also look into is access to basic services. So what are the basic services that the community currently have in the settlement, and what are the needs that they want? And those are the things that we record when we do the enumeration. This is all based on strengthening the incremental tenure for the local resident of informal settlements, because we know that it's very difficult when it comes to tenure security in these kind of settlements, because it's informal, it's not a formal area. So now I'm gonna move into the next slide. That's not working. Okay. There you go. So the next slide is actually explaining the processes, how VPEU engage with incremental tenure security. So VPEU uses an administration of recognition system approach, where we strengthen and improve incremental tenure for local residents in informal settlement areas. By doing an enumeration, first thing we need to do is partner or engage with local leadership. That's where we will engage with the current stakeholders that are existing in the settlement and sort of announce our aims and processes that are going to we're going to go through. And then this is important because they make awareness within the local residents about the process that we're going to be engaging on, which is called enumeration. And then once that is done, then we have to move on to the next step where we recruit local people, and then we train those field workers to be able to carry out the enumeration process itself. And the whole process now of the enumeration is called data collection strategy with 3 distinct phases, where in step 1, we have to do the reblocking, because we know in informal settlements, everyone just come and build, and then they get themselves the number. And then in that space, and then you easily to get duplicate numbers or addresses for people. So we have to do the reblocking and then label all the structures in the settlement. Then the second step then will be interviewing people, the household resident itself, where we ask variety of questions that relates to their living conditions, that relates to their experience in the settlement. And our questionnaire is actually in line with the questionnaire of Stats SA, because some of the content that we use is taken directly from the Stats SA questionnaire. And then verification process, that's the last phase, which is the third step. There, out of the data that we collected within the people, then we will have to produce now that letter of resident that we call it proof of address. And we'll issue out in each and every household, those that we can find in their houses, and the ones that are not in their house, probably they'll come and visit our office, and then they will come and collect their letters of residence. This is where people now have a chance to verify their information if it's legit or correct, the way it's captured. And if it's not so, then they have an opportunity now to rectify with the mistakes that have been done by the team that collecting the data. Moving on to the next slide. The next slide talks about the process itself, just in practical. So labeling of structures, where we do the reblogging, is we have the field workers that visit the structures. They have the field maps on their hands with QR codes. There we generate QR codes for each and every structure, so that QR code has a link to the number of that structure as well. And then we paint the numbers on the structure. Once we do the painting, and then we capture the information that we've done on the mobile device. So on the mobile device, we use an app that's called ODK, which is an open source app that you can download on the internet, Google. You can get it on Google as well. And then the next step is talk about numeration process. That numeration process, our field workers visiting the residents on their households, and then they will interview them using the mobile phone to capture the information. And then they will scan the QR code that we paste on the structure during the painting process so that they link that information with that particular structure. And then they have the map that they indicate all the households that they've been interviewed as well. And then the last phase, that process just indicates a verification process where field workers or residents actually come to our office and they will come and collect their letter of residence. And we will indicate on the map which household has collected their map and the information is correct, confirmed. And we therefore also verify by scanning their QR codes to make sure that that person has got the right letter on themselves. So these are just processes that we've gone through in a practical aspect. Move on to the next slide. In the next slide, it's showing how do we link our work, this numeration or tenure protocol we do with the triangle of violence. So VPEU is aiming to tackle and address cultural and structural violence on a household level, inclusive of everyone in the community. It is important that everybody in the community gets into a register. That is why we make sure that we visit each and every household to make sure everybody is registered and they all have their proof of residence at the end of the day. The second point is, by doing so, we're giving rights to all residents to access equal opportunities and services in order to fulfill their basic human needs. So by having this, this proof of residence, this recognition of a letter that says you are a resident in Monobisi Park, you can now access services to clinic, to banks, to anywhere, any institution, government institution that you need to know. So you can use this kind of letter of residence that we provided throughout this numeration process. And then people are they can get whatever they need. And this also allows them the opportunity, if, for example, Eskom wants to electrify their structures, they can use this information to access such services to Eskom electricity. And then the third point is the system also allows local residents to be recognized and encourages the marginalized groups, the communities, and strengthen their tenure security. This speaks to, we know that in most of the informal settlements, especially I'll think, for example, in Black communities, there are cultural norms and such that suggest that women can never be head of the household if there's a man involved in the house. So there's that cultural norm of the beliefs that's happening within those settlements. But by implementing this such program, we give people, everyone, equal opportunities to be the head of the household if they are the head of the household in their particular household. So also they can share jointly head of the household with the men that they live in within their household. So it doesn't allow people to bully other people as well, even if it's to suppress them on their voices that they want to raise. And then lastly, we have, in most cases where you deal with child-headed households, we often become vulnerable. Sorry about misspelling there, it should be vulnerable. Vulnerable and suppressed by cultural structures in informal settlements. So hence our tools that we provide are such an significant intervention to bring peace and stability. So we have scenarios where you have a house, a household that is child-hearted household being based on on various reasons. Maybe they lost their parents, now they're left alone, and then the uncle will come and try to inherit everything. But in this process that we run, there is no other way that they can cheat that. There's no other way that they can take over and control that child-hearted household because they are protected by the system that we use at the moment. Moving on to the next slide, just move up this guy out of the picture here. Okay. The next slide is going to speak to what is an impact we make towards a social ecological model. So if you look at your screen, there's two diagrams. On your right, there's a letter of residence, which we call it proof of address, that we provide out of our enumeration system. And then on the left, you've got your social ecological diagram that you see there. So we're saying by providing the letter of residence or proof of address to an individual or a household family, it creates a safer community and strengthens their tenure security. So most people, when they have this document that says you are a person that recognizes you are currently staying in this area, acknowledge that you are occupying a structure in a particular informal settlement, that brings a belief and the confidence to yourself to say, I am a citizen. So that's what we're trying to create in this kind of aspect. It starts on individuals and it goes to families, and then we're trying to bring it to the whole community. So at the society level or community level, we focus on improving both physical and social environment by changing systems and spaces where people can socialize together. So it is important now. I think colleagues, one of our colleagues today, I think it's Spumla, when she introduced herself, she mentioned that whatever you want to start, safety or your security of safety start within you. We also think that to change the community will start from individual and it grows to a family, and then it creates community, and then we build a safer society. So that's the approach that we're trying to bring into this model. So hence we also work with the City of Cape Town, and we recently trained City of Cape Town all staff members to apply the very system that we use in other informal settlements or other areas, just to mitigate the forms of structural violence within these areas that we work within. Moving on to the next. So the next slide shows the process of replicating this system that we use in another area. So this is the process that we hand over to City of Cape Town staff members, and when we train them to can take it and replicate it in somewhere else. The process was applied in a pilot study conducted in one of the areas in Cape Town. It's called Bosasa 2, adjacent to Mfuleni Township. So this process was done with City of Cape Town staff only. We just trained them, and then we allowed them to carry out the process on their own. The exercise was done successfully on the pilot, and they were happy with the results at the end. And if I can move on to the next slide. This is probably the last slide that I have. This is a team that brings the magic to the work that we do. These are trained local team of residents to carry out our enumeration process. And you could see that the diversity that comes from the team in terms of age and gender, it also brings like cohesiveness within the group to work together. So yeah, that's the last slide I have for you guys, and I think that's it. Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if there are any questions. I'll still be here. If there are none, I'll thank you so much for your time.
We do have a question from the first session from Petang's session.
Okay.
I will invite other questions relating to Tulani as well. Just have a think on that. And Thomas has reminded us that we can continue using the chat to raise questions if we do not want to do so verbally. So Thomas's question to you, Petang, is regarding your experience with local government and the role of local government in what they can support you on in establishing ECDs that are similar to what you are doing at VPU with regards, for example, to curriculum and the curriculum development and standardization, as well as ongoing support that you are receiving from local government, and how local government can go about supporting you and assisting in the curriculum development and standardization. And if there are other organizations like VPU that do exist, or whether if they do not exist, how can you work with local government, I think, in spreading the message, spreading the word, and creating similar ECDs?
Cool. Thank you.
You're on.
I'm not on. Okay. No, sorry guys, I'm not using my own computer today. Apologies, but thank you so much for the question. I think ECD in South Africa in general, especially in informal settlements, is still a very contentious issue, if I could put it that way. And I'm saying this with reference to registration, the registration process. A lot of conversations currently going on around how to better support ECD centers in this space. But a lot of the times, ECD centers in these spaces, you could say, experience a lot of neglect. We have definitely been working with local government. It's through local government that we have access to EPWP, if I could put it that way. And I think the way we work with EPWP at the moment, I mean, I'm not disregarding how other people work at EPWP, but I find this a very creative way to basically feed into the ECD sector as a whole. So in that sense, yes, we do have access to, I mean, we are working with local government. In terms of when your center is registered, you have the opportunity now to have access to government funding. It's not much. I think they pay about 17 Rand per child per month or something like that. But even so, just to get to that point where your center is eligible to have access to that funding, it's a huge process. And if you're an ECD center that is in an informal settlement, it's almost close to impossible. So the partnerships, I think, that we build from the community partnerships, any other NGOs that exist in this space that are doing similar work, or even just ourselves working with the community, but as well as the ECD forum, is super important in this sense. Because as you remember, I said then we have the opportunity to do things as a collective and ask for help or create opportunities as a collective. So it's tricky. It's easier if you're in a formalized area. And in informal settlements, you definitely are going to come across a lot of walls, but it takes those partnerships to actually be able to unlock certain things. We have been in chats with DSD. Obviously, now the function of ECD has moved to Department of Education. So the one center that I said is an ECD, a registered ECD center that is registered with the Department of Education, and we're currently working on our funding application to be able to support that. But everything else, our outreach program, our M20 program, our toy library, is not currently being supported by, well, I mean, we're not getting access from the DOE, access funding from the DOE to support its operation. It's all, we're doing this internally and otherwise. Oh, and in the Social Employment Fund, yeah, that's very important. So there are a lot of tools that exist, obviously, within government and society, but it's a matter of being creative about how we use those tools. I think I covered all the aspects of that question. If I did not, I'll come back to it at a later stage. Thank you.
We do have a question from Boykanyo. We'll give him or her an opportunity to ask that question, and then I'll address the second question in the chat from Teresa. Boikanyo, over to you.
Hi all, thank you so much. I've got a question for Petang. I'm sorry if you are unable to hear me, please just indicate I'm on the road. But I just wanted to speak to just in terms of in the interest of the national decolonization project. I'm just wondering with these ECD centers, specifically Petang, when you refer to Bomama that have started these creches, and maybe for the interest of gaining profits, but also in most instances it's women that love kids that already have this touch. Is there, in terms of the curriculums that are being drawn up, is there some sort of integration process and inclusion process that takes place in terms of an exchange of information and an exchange in the ways that things are done, right? I'm just thinking in terms of, are we just coming into those creches and imposing ways or systems of doing things which are different from what they have done, where we could have a mesh of the two ways, like, well, we are record keeping, but at the same time they have seen along the years that these are the types of processes or the things that they use to teach children particular things, especially children who might have special needs or such. So is there like an integration process, an inclusion process in the drawing up of the curriculums, but as well just an exchange of information in terms of the things, the ways that they rear children, the way that they care for children. Thank you so much. Oh, and then
Okay, we lost Boikanyo there, but just to answer her question, in terms of what we've done, let me explain what we've done. Through our partnership with the Unlimited Child, we've managed to get all the ECD centers operating in Marisi Park basically to have the same kind of training, so that that's more a form of standardization of curriculum across the informal settlement. So if a child leaves from one center into the other, that there's a consistency in learning. In no way or form is it to impose that the Unlimited Child is better than whatever other ECD curriculum exists. However, this is who we've partnered with, and that's who we have access to at the moment. What I do see happening a lot in terms of, let's say, peer-to-peer learning and opportunities of gaining other information is ECD centers that form parts of the ECD forum use that opportunity quite a lot to gain information from each other. So when I refer to Bomama, it's not to really talk down to their efforts. I think there's a lot of value in what they do. Also considering that the ECD sector in South Africa is really, the fabric is predominantly informal. Yes, it falls under a department, but there's still a lot of clarity and a lot of ways and systems that need to be ironed out in order for this to function and benefit everybody equally in South Africa. At the moment, it's not the case. So when they join an ECD forum, not all of them join it. I mean, for whatever reason, some of them choose not to be a part of the forum. But when they do join an ECD forum, they have access to information. They have access to the likes of the ALRUs and the Center for Early Child Development. Those are organizations that help ECD centers basically with the registration process in various ways. And it's just being able to have someone that you can also talk to and ask questions and be able to be guided. What kind of posters do I need? What kind of anything? But we have seen, and I'm sure some of you have also seen, when you go to a center and there's absolutely nothing that will stimulate the child in any way. And that mom at that moment is really trying her utmost best to provide a space where the child is safe for the couple of hours that the parent is at work. But it's more child minding than it is going through the actual ECD curriculum, if I could put it that way. So standardization is important, but it's difficult in the way it's being done now, and that there isn't really a form of standardizing what needs to be done, because not, as I mentioned, not everybody has been trained in the same way. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Petang. We'll be taking the last question directed to Petang now. It's in the chat, and I'm hoping that we will have other questions for Thulani's part of the presentation before we break. So Teresa is asking, how do communities access your services? Or does VPU decide where to implement? in terms of ECDs and in terms of informal settlements?
VPU works a lot in partnership with the City of Cape Town. So that's basically one way in which we operate basically is where the city has also prioritized. But within those spaces, we've got neighborhood centers, we've got continued meetings. All our neighborhood centers, you can get information about what's happening, and it's open to the community all the time. So they have access to us in that way. And if they come to the regular meetings, there's constant updates about what's happening and where they can access that particular bit of information. But I think, again, that partnership with the city plays a crucial role about what we do and how to what extent we do it. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have a question for Thulani. Thank you so much, Petang. Are community members open to answering surveys and participating in this process, or do you receive pushback? First question. Second question, how have you been able to measure the different impacts, such as feeling, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like a citizen? Okay,
Yes,
terms such as, okay, thank you. I am sure it brings great joy, but that is hard to capture. So the feelings of feeling like a citizen.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. I mean, to answer the first question is, yes, they are willing to participate. I mean, firstly, we partner with the leadership. Is it not on?
No.
Do I put it where? There? Oh, okay. Back on. I was offline. Yeah, I was saying, cities, I mean, residents are willing to participate in a survey. Firstly, we partner with the local leadership where we create awareness, to all residents that they need to participate and become the list of the community register as well. So with that partnership with the leadership, and then it brings confidence for them to participate as well. But we do have an option for them if they don't want to participate, they don't, because we have a consent form that they sign so that we know that they participate in the survey. And in the consent form, we do have a POPI Act that is attached to the consent form as well. But in most cases, they do participate in the survey. But the second question, to answer the second question around how do we capture the feelings of being a citizen, it's actually practical for us, because when we deliver the letter of residence to them, and even so, for those that are not at home, they don't get the letters. We give it to all that are available at home. So immediately the one that comes back home, and then they notice that my neighbor's got a letter that she is a citizen or she's a resident here. And then they become excited. They visit our office often to come and collect their letters as well. You could see from that that this is a feeling, it's a good feeling that to have this document in hand, it makes me feel like I'm a citizen, or I'm known that as a resident of this area. So that's where we capture the feeling. Yeah. Are those two names? Okay.
Thank you so much, Thulani. And again, thank you again, Petang. We will have a short break. We've been quite interactive, and we are reducing our break to 5 minutes. So I will see you, or 7 minutes rather, 25 minutes past 11. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you shortly. Welcome back, everyone. We are continuing with the rest of the workshop. I will be handing over to Michael once again to look at institutional crime prevention and evidence. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks very much, Fiona. And a big thank you to our two colleagues, Petang and Thulani, who basically assisted us with the institute and with the tenure security and early childhood development. I would like to take a quick touch on institutional crime prevention before we then go into the exercise and the case study. And thank you very much, Charmaine, for being involved and putting your project up. So we got one project so far. If you still want to, please mute. If a second example would like to come on, I'm sure we can accommodate it as well. But Charmaine, thank you very much for being willing to expose yourself and expose us to the work, the great work that you do in Swana. So for the institutional crime prevention, I want to focus on one particular element, and that's around taking directly from the integrated crime and violence prevention strategy. Why are we doing multi-sectoral projects? Because that's so important to work on a multi-sectoral level. We know that crime affects all spheres of life and all sectors, and how do we can work together? And what we felt, what we experienced in the last couple of years is so supportive for us is the concept of what's called a collective impact. I'm sure some of you have heard about that. That's really the collective impact, and I'm sure that Swan is also a good case study for that, is the organizations from different sectors work together and work with different stakeholders. And one understands and agrees on a certain special social problem. And let's take crime in our particular case, or violence prevention. You've got a very difficult situation, and you can only do it in partnerships. And what does the partnership underpin? So it is important to find a common agenda for change. I think the work that we do in the city of Cape Town is a good example of that, where the city officials, various line departments from the city, communities, and implementers like ourselves are actually defining a common agenda. In our language, it's called a community action plan on a localized area. You then basically look and align your efforts. So that's really defining who is responsible for what. And that's cutting through the different mandates of people, so that people and organizations and line departments are comfortable to work with each other and align their efforts rather than duplicate efforts. And that's a common measure. That's very important to have a common measure of success. So what do we want to achieve? Because if we look at our SD-BIPs, if we are officials, or we look at our targets or our theory of change, if we are from the CSO, etc., we need to understand where is that overlap between ourselves, between the needs of the relevant intervention area and the partners. And that's really the common measures that we want to measure in order to find the success we want to go. We all know that without communication, there can be misunderstandings, there could be working against each other unintended, or there could be different understandings of a particular goal. So it is important to have those ongoing communication, have regular meetings, document stuff, and you need to coordinate it. So therefore, you need a backbone support. So be quite clear on who takes that responsibility. It is a big task to do in a intervention. Be clear who does the coordinating, who does the backbone support, who is the administrative hub of a particular intervention. So if you bring those 5 elements together, the common agenda, you agree on the shared measures, your activities are mutually reinforcing, so you're aligned, you have good communication internally, externally, etc., and feedback loops, and you know who is responsible for what and who is giving the backbone support, who is doing the project management, who is doing the administration, who is doing the communication and so forth, then you will see the collective impact coming through. Okay, so for a multi-sectoral project, I think it's important that each sector is able to effectively implement interventions that lie within their mandate. But it's that alignment that I spoke about at the collective impact, so that we have those mutual reinforcing activities. So if you are a line department, your mandate is, for instance, social development, it might be that there are elements that are supported, for instance, for after school. So all the US programs would be then reinforcing for an intervention that the Department of Education does in after school activities that potentially community safety does, and your 3 or 4 NGOs plus the school itself as well. So this is how you need to make sure but the different interventions lie within the mandate. Once we start to go out of our mandate, it's always an add-on, and that won't be sustainable. So it's important to find that, and if we need to push mandates, try to push the mandates. I think what we got, in particular through the integrated crime and violence prevention strategy, we got a wonderful policy coherence across the different sectors. We spoke in the first session also around IUDF, the integrated urban development framework, about gender-based violence initiatives and frameworks. So the policies are all there here in South Africa. So the policy coherence is there. So let's work on it and see whose mandate is it and how can we align. And obviously, the good thing for a multi-sectoral approach is, and people will buy in if they see that the costs of coordinating are basically is not outweighed by the benefits. So we need to ensure, if you ask the partner to become part of a multi-sectoral project, that they see the input they give is contributing to a bigger thing, and the bigger thing, the effort is basically larger than the sum. The sum is larger than the cost of the individual parts. So that's basically making sure that each partner sees the value of collaboration and working together. Okay, we were looking at, and Petang and Thulani gave some input of what we do, and we looked at how does, for instance, a multi-sectoral approach is in a project like our project represented. So when we start an intervention, you're really analyzing various elements, and that's your institutional landscape, your social environment, as well as the built environment. There's this analysis, which could be a baseline survey, different people call it differently. You're creating that sense of urgency. You're creating the status quo, you're creating that context that I was talking right at the beginning of session one and at the review or reflection earlier today, is to make sure those are the marginalizations, that's the status quo, that's the context we work, and how can everybody contribute to that. The creating of a guiding coalition, and Petang was talking about it in the ECD sector, working with the ECD forums, for instance. Or Thulani was talking about the guiding coalition being the local representative leadership structure. Those are the partners, the community partners we work with. In the city of Cape Town, there's a beautiful thing set up. It's called the Area Coordinating Teams. That is on a local area. Cape Town got so-called sub-councils, but it could be a substructure as well. We did the same in Soweto with the city of Joburg. You have different line departments with their mandates, sitting together and understanding what is my role, what is my mandate to work in a particular area neighborhood. So that's the officials. That's married with or mirrored rather, with a project steering committee in the community, which is representative. And then you got the intergovernmental relations, for instance, if the national government comes into a particular area. So that guiding coalition that's governed with an institutional setup is really important. Talking about the vision and the strategy, which you need to have for your common agenda for change, if you go back to the of our idea of a collective impact, that's obviously we got the IDP, the Integrated Development Plan, that's on the municipal boundary, we got on the provincial, and on the national, we got the National Development Plan. But how does it fit into a neighborhood? There I alluded a little bit that in areas it might be helpful to have a community action plan that identifies who is responsible for that, or particular spatial framework, like the PIF stands for Public Investment Framework, or you've got a safety strategy through the police, etc., or through the CPF. So there are possibilities and means and ways to have this integrated strategy on a smaller area than your municipal structure, and please align to that, that's so important. Once we got that strategy, make sure it gets communicated. And it could be communicated through ward structures, through sub-councils, through the council, through newsletters, community newsletters, or community structures. you name it. It is important that you have organizations you report back or the collective reports back. And not only mandated structures or structures of officials in the public sector, but also make sure that you give feedback to community structures. In order to see value of the collaborative work in a multi-sectoral approach, it is important to have very short-term wins. So look at what are potential short-term wins in a long-term strategy and long-term project. So what usually works in the case of safety is to look for elements of how can I stabilize a situation. Typical examples are, for instance, setting up a neighborhood watch structure and working with or supporting an existing neighborhood watch structure and strengthening that. Or urban management interventions have come to light quite often in the last couple of years, where people say it is important if we improve our urban management, and I'm sure you know all the mayors that talk about potholes and that talk about lights that should work, etc. But it gives that short-term wins and that confidence in a partnership. But where we experience very positive feedback is either through ward allocations or through dedicated funds to work with short-term, small-scale projects, which the community structures have a high possibility of decision-making. So the community structures aligned to your area strategy got an opportunity to implement short-term projects. So that is also, besides having a direct impact in the community, there's also a lot of skills development because people and structures and community organizations understand and get an opportunity to be exposed to funding mechanisms. Typical example for stabilization in our situation, we gave two examples also, is the early childhood development, work with the ECD forum, or if it's an informal sector, you probably want to know who's living in the area, and that would be your enumeration. What is important also as you go along in the multi-sectoral, and most likely that's a multi-year intervention, is to consolidate your gains and reflect on a regular basis. So make sure that you have your annual review meetings, that you go into the more difficult and more structured interventions like the infrastructure, and then also look how can you build on those short-term interventions. So how does a intervention in urban management becomes a precinct management, for instance? Have you got the right partners for that? Do you need to have a dedicated partner? And there are many good examples from various municipalities, be it Joburg, be it eThekwini, be it Cape Town, where intermediaries are utilized in order to perform some of the services on the neighborhood or precinct scale. What is important if you want to see change through your multi-sectoral approach and if you want to embed the collective impact is to also institutionalize that. And the institutionalization requires also a new approach and a culture change. And if you want to institutionalize culture change, you need to work through the systems. And probably the most powerful system for municipal and provincial officials is to work through your SDBIPs or through your KPIs or KPAs, so that you make it the key priority areas of the various officials, so that collective ownership is a process and is a technique that's utilized by everybody. There's obviously you need to flank that with a lot of training. You probably want to do it with some media as well, so that you showcase good collaboration. But it's also the collaboration with the community. So be accountable to the strategies that you put out yourself into the community and go back on a regular basis, on an annual basis, and say, this is where we are. That's what we have achieved, and that's what we haven't achieved. And those are the reasons why we haven't been able to achieve it. But then mutual accountability is also important. It's not us giving the show. It is actually a reciprocal process. So also get feedback from other structures. What have you done in that space? One thing that we have discussed in the ABBPI, and we have a meeting later on today, the advisory group, is again sort of how can one fund all those interventions? Are there possibilities of giving, for instance, conditional budgeting? So if you have a collaborative approach, if you're looking for collective impact, is there a possibility of giving a top up, for instance, and you're rewarding line departments, officials, CSOs, etc., to work together? You can get creative and get donor funds, or you can find it hopefully in your own budgets. And it's great to see that there are people here, like from senior people from various departments that potentially have those decision-making powers. So I would like to go back and say and carry on a little bit is how do we measure success? In particular, how do we measure success? If we do measure success, how do we link it back to the 6 themes of the strategy, the integrated crime and violence prevention strategy? It's the victim support, it's the early intervention, it's the effective integrated service delivery for safety and security and towards safety and violence prevention. It's the CEPTEP, it's the effective criminal justice system, and that's the community participation and the active public participation. So how do we measure that? How do we put things towards that? So a lot of work has been done by the Urban Reference Group, Urban Safety Reference Group, and I know that many of you are members of that reference group, which is great. We got the knowledge within the rubric. The Urban Safety Reference Group has come up with 21 indicators and a number of strategy types. The indicators you can see on the left-hand side, you also find it in the annual reports. If you look at the annual reports, they are very well recorded on the Safer Spaces website. So if you can't find it, go to Safer Spaces and find it there. And there are structures in 3 elements. On the one hand, the ones in yellow are conditions of crime and violence. In orange are social and structural risk factors. And then we're looking at the city responses or general responses towards particular risks. So you can see it coming through what we were talking about. How do we mitigate risk factors? So how to become risk factors? How can we protect? How can we find protective measures towards risk factors? And what are particular conditions of crime and violence? And earlier on, we spoke about maybe those objective factors like a murder rate and assault rate. So your typical police statistics, a robbery rate. Thanks very much for putting it up in the chat. The sexual offense rates, the property-related crimes, etc., the police activity. That's all great. Those are objective factors, but are they representative? Are they reported? And I'm sure you all have been in conversations. Why do we see an underreporting of many crimes, in particular areas of high need? That could be the trust in the police. So I'm not going there if nothing is going to happen. Or property crimes are reported because I've got an insurance. And if I don't have an insurance, I do not report a property-related crime. So they got a role to play. And although they are called objective factors, they may not be representative. We also need to find other proxy indicators. And that becomes then the subjective factors. And Tulani, besides running the enumeration, is also running a lot of household surveys on a regular basis in the communities where we work. So we have those figures around experience of crime and violence over a longer period, and you see trends. So can we build that into our interventions, into our interventions, that we have touch points where we ask community members or members that we our target groups, be it young adults, be it a particular group, women, etc., be it other target groups that we're looking at, that we have a regular check-in. That goes also to the feelings. So the experience is obviously a direct experience. The feelings is the perception or the feelings of safety. And then we got the third one, the perception of safety. And also then with law enforcement and police. So you can see those subjective factors, those proxy indicators might be quite valuable Again, they are not quick wins because you need to see a trend. So having once-off data is a dipstick, but you can't really create a trend of that. So you need to do it continuously. If you look at the indicators that looked at social and structural risk factors related to it, we're looking at urbanization factors, we're looking at marginalization factors, and we're looking at the social and physical environmental factors, which you may look at. I'm just naming them. I don't want to go too much into it because we want to spend some time on the actual projects as well. So in your urbanization is obviously the rate of urbanization. That could be an indicator. It's the density of the population, and it's the social incoherence or the family disruption that one could take as indicators. And if you look at the marginalization, it's your poverty rate, your income inequality, it's your unemployment, particularly the youth unemployment, and then it's obviously also the deprivation of services. So what is the service provision? What is the standard? And what's the actual? What's the gap in between? And you will recall that from last week, I've shown an example from Cape Town, how it features, and it's, for instance, one of the main key indicators how we choose areas. If we're looking for the areas of deprivation, where's the gap? Where do we need to fill the gap in order to get to a more equal society? If you look at the social and physical environmental factors, it's the number of informal housing compared to formal housing, it's infrastructure, it is school conditions and school violence, and it's also the access to alcohol, drugs, and firearms. So those are the 21 indicators that were collectively decided on by the Urban Reference Group, and they may be quite helpful. And if you all would use a selection of that, we would start to see that our interventions are starting to become comparable with one each other. And then we could see what are the best strategies, what are the best interventions to actually tackle the variety of the issues that we see within crime and violence. At the strategy types, you can see a lot is around social cohesion and how do we work with police, how do we work with communities. It's how does police, we know the different types of police, some are under municipal control, the majority is under national control. How do we work with non-state actors, with the CPS, with community safety forums, etc. if you got them? How do we do the change of the built environments with accepted principles? And how do we work around the victim support? So that's your social crime prevention. And we spoke about it at length earlier on. We're looking at the impact, and it's also again of the longitudinal study. And here I'm going into one of those objective factors. That's the murder rate over the last 15 years. In Khayelitsha was the blue line, and in red in the areas where we work, and one area where we work. So you can see sort of it has initially been a higher incident rate in the areas where we worked. There's a drop off in the last couple of years. What I'm trying to say is you need to monitor it over a long period. And if you had a success, a short-term success, just be mindful of the different complexities and don't become complacent. So it is a long-term intervention if you want to reduce murder. But there's a clear trend line between what has happened in the areas where we work and the general areas around it. We did a 3-year, or rather the University of Cape Town did a 3-year impact research of what is the difference that is made by a multi-sectoral approach that looks at urban violence prevention, or as we call it in this context, the ABVPI. And what was done from public health is they actually looked at the whole of Khayelitsha. So you got your control areas and you got your intervention areas. And you got the areas in between that maybe got a little bit of a dosage. And they almost like looked at an intervention as if it was a medication to a patient. So it's around the dosage. And what you see here in blue, that's where the highest dosage was basically applied to. That's the immediate intervention area. Then you will see that this green circle, that's the intermediate. So it's still in walking distance. So it's still about a kilometer, 1 to 2 kilometers maximum, right? So if you would like to go and get access to some of the services, you could still walk within 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. And the assumption is, and the reality is that people would still access those services. And then you got far away, that's above 2 kilometers, it's anything that lies outside that green circle. And you can see so that households have been interviewed across all areas. So we got in that study, and that was done over 3 years on an annual survey. You got the control areas, and you can also pick up in the intervention in areas certain trends and differences. So what were they looking at? They were looking at the experience of severe violence by the residents. That's on the left-hand side. They were looking at the experience of violence in public spaces, which is also on the left-hand side. And they looked at the mental health condition on the right-hand side. And there's some summary findings far right. Let me quickly guide you through the experience of severe violence in the proximity of that blue area from the previous page. The overall in Khayelitsha, 17% of the people have experienced severe violence in the past year before the intervention, before the question was. There's a general reflection that men experience have a much higher risk than women when it comes to the experience of violence. And in informal settlements, there's also a higher risk of having an incident of severe violence. So what you can see in the difference between and the red bar is the area of intervention. Gray bar is the intermediate within that green circle, and the blue bar is outside the green circle from the previous page. So what you see in principle is here that there's a significantly lower risk if you reside in that intervention area, which is the red bar, and it's irrespective whether you are male, female, whether you live in a formal or informal areas, compared to the blue bar, which is basically 2 kilometers. That is a very positive feedback. So it means that a multi-sectoral, concentrated intervention has a positive impact over time on the intervention area and the immediate area around it. If you look at the mental health status, the result is we experience significantly lower levels of depression within the intervention area, which is the red bar, and to a certain extent the gray bar, particularly for women and for people living in formal areas. It's very positive that it has a gender bias. So what it in essence means that intervention, the ABBPI had the power to reduce the stress within the community. And it's very positive. And if you look at the summary findings, the summary findings, there were 5 from UCT, that residents living close to the intervention area experience lower risk of violence. Residents in informal settlements are at a higher risk than residents living in formal areas, so that got confirmed. There is a clear association, and you can't see it out of these figures, but there was a parallel, there was a result or research done on alcohol outlets. There's an association between higher densities of alcohol outlets and the higher levels of violence. So we could show that around shebeens and illegal alcohol outlets, the occurrence of violence was higher than in areas that had a lower density of alcohol outlets. And we could see also areas with a higher social coherence experience lower levels of interpersonal violence. In essence, if people know each other, if people know their neighbors, if you got good representative leadership structures, you got a higher social cohesion, and that really has a positive impact on interpersonal violence. So building that social cohesion, so the colleagues that are involved in community participation, keep up your good work. It is a form, it's one of the best forms of crime prevention. And you have an impact, particular of interpersonal violence. And then the fifth finding was men are at a higher risk than women for severe violence. So what I was talking about earlier on was also around accountability and giving feedback to the people that we're working with, and that is to the state actors, as well as also to community structures. Always make sure that you involve your target group and you give feedback in good times as well as in bad times. Because it's important to share the successes, but also to own the failures together. Okay, in conclusion, before we go into the group conversation, I would just like to sort of sum up again what is the area-based violence prevention initiative, what are the different ingredients. We have 8 ingredients. Adopt a community-centered approach that puts people first. Assemble the various stakeholders and partners who will be crucial to the intervention. Use the critical emergent information to develop a joint vision for the intervention. Assign the roles and responsibilities to stakeholders and partners. Have an evidence-based community-informed approach. Prioritize the issues and activation, maintenance and management throughout the project life. Develop a budget and allocate sufficient resources. And then have a flexible and adaptive monitoring, evaluation, and learning system. So you can see a lot of synergies between the ABVPI approach or ingredients and the collective impact. Okay, so I would really like to move on to the group discussion, if that's okay. And Charmaine has been brave enough to expose the project from Tswana. I just need to make a small announcement. Eskom has informed us that we will have load shedding in the next 5 minutes. So I'm sure we will stay online, but we might have some issues with the microphone. So we no longer have the shared microphone. We would then switch on to the laptop's microphone. I just want to announce that we might have an interruption in a couple of seconds here. So if you can't see me or can't hear me, don't get confused. We will be back online. Currently, we are online. So we would like to focus on those three questions. Can you pretty much sort of put your intervention into relation to the 3 types of violence, and also towards the socio-ecological model, and then contemplate a little bit about the partnerships. What partnerships do we have, and to what means do we have what goals? What are the partners for, and how we have shared goals, etc. And then also looking a little bit what do we see as measures of success, and how do we monitor it? So we've prepared. So Charmaine, I think it would be good if you can start to come in a little bit. I can't see the screen because I only see my screen. So if you could start to introduce you a little bit. I just want to give a little bit of the what we intend to do. I will go out of the presentation mode, and I think you can still see my screen. And then we'll start to look sort of at what level are you intervening, and then look at the direct violence and the cultural and structural violence as you speak, and you can probably guide me, and then look at the individual. And then we would also like to link it a little bit, how does it link to the ICVP strategy, and then also look at what partnerships do we have. So Charmaine, over to you if you want to start describing a little bit your intervention, and with keeping in mind those 3 different types of violence and the 4 levels of the socio-ecological model. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm just going to put my camera on for a short while. I'm having a little bit of connection issues today. So yeah, I think most of our interventions are on a community level, as well as relationship and individual levels. And I'm not sure, should I give different examples, but yeah, okay, let me give some examples. I think on individual, we have our substance abuse program, the COSA program, which looks at the rehabilitation of substance users. And when they're rehabilitated, they're also used as peer counselors. So I think that is more an individual approach. Then with substance abuse, it's also on a group level because we also have it as part of our Safe Schools program, where we do substance abuse interventions in that regard. So obviously, we also have municipal police services. So on a neighborhood community level, you know, we will have operations. So for instance, bylaw operations aimed at liquor outlets that are problematic and crime hotspots. So we also have EPWP programs that are running, and we have also managed to get that that crime prevention through environmental design is included in our spatial development frameworks, as well as precinct plans. So yeah, I think all of those kind of impact on direct violence. I think in terms of cultural violence, you know, with gender, I think it's still an ongoing ongoing thing, but I think the EPWP project assists in that because we do have indicators in terms of gender. I know that internally, as an organization, we are also running various gender mainstreaming interventions within the city, on an employee level, but as well as in terms of the services we render to the community. In terms of structural violence, I think all of us, you know, that will be a lot of the municipal programs that are running based at economic development, social development, human settlements. Like I said, the incorporation of crime prevention through environmental design. Also looking at transport equality, because we know that disadvantaged communities also have unequal access to to public transport, or it's more expensive. So even something such as transport equality is another way that we contribute. Yeah, then I'm not too sure if I should cover the monitoring and evaluation, maybe just guide me, or how it aligns with the pillars of the white paper. I think a lot of community participation. We've used the public employment program to capacitate PEPs to participate in safety audits. In terms of community participation in substance abuse program and so forth. The safety through environmental design we have incorporated in our spatial development framework and in the precinct plans, which are aimed at various neighborhood levels. The effective criminal justice system, we are working with the police, with prosecutors, and trying to see how we improve the justice system in that regard, because as a city of Tshwane, we do have a municipal police service. And in terms of evidence-based approaches, we participate in different platforms such as the Urban Safety Reference Group and so forth, so that we can see how we can learn from researchers, NGOs, other cities on best practices and what the latest evidence shows in terms of this participation. So with early intervention programs, obviously as a city, we've got various ECD programs. And like I said, we do have a Safe School program together with Department of Education and other role players. And yeah, I think those are just some of the high level things. I'm not sure if I should go into more detail, but the other cities can maybe share some info.
And Shami, thank you very much. It's that's a lot. Maybe reflect a little bit. I don't know whether you can see the screen. So you spoke a lot about the types of violence and the level of intervention. So looking at those three types and the socio-ecological model. And I don't know whether I captured everything I was trying to capture while you were talking. So some of the interventions, if I understand it correctly, they're very much aligned to the socio-ecological model. And you spoke, for instance, about the substance abuse, where you said you have intervention targeted at individuals, at the family or the group, and also at the neighborhood. And you have different, what I understand, you have different tactics for that, and that's great. And then you spoke about, for instance, GBV that you, and I may not have gotten everything, but you spoke about that's, for instance, you see that as cultural violence, and that's particular individual support for victims of gender-based violence, I presume. And then you looked at, you said the structural violence you tackled primarily on a neighborhood scale or community, but it could be also on a society scale. I'm not so sure, might be need to help me. And that's very much through targeted programs, but also through policy. That's what I understood. But correct me if I'm wrong, because you spoke very quick and I had to, maybe you can assist me here, that it's reflected correctly on the screen what you were talking. So maybe you can confirm or add to it right now.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry, I have a tendency to speak very quickly. So the gender-based violence, it is obviously we have interventions aimed at cultural violence, but then also obviously the economic development programs and things like that also interlink with the gender violence to address the structural elements.
Okay.
And then in terms of obviously our policing function, we do have roles to play in terms of responding to gender-based violence and rapid response teams and so forth. And that is coordinated by the City Social Development Department. So in terms of direct violence, we do have some interventions for gender-based violence on that. And then as relates to spatial planning, transport and so forth, I thought it is neighborhood or community because often the precinct plans are done. So for instance, there was a study done on Solomon Mahlangu Drive, and studies were done with women specifically around the safety around non-motorized transport. So a lot of these precinct plans are on a neighborhood or community level. And yeah, that's why as a Metro Police, we really try to get involved in these plans so that we can make sure that safety is always reflected in this planning. So yeah, some of it might be on a broader level, like the broader spatial development framework, but emanating from that, we have precinct plans that speak to specific neighborhoods.
That's excellent. I really appreciate that you as Metro Police take a very active role in what other municipalities may say is a planning issue. So that's really good that you have that integrated and multi-sectoral. And maybe we can look a little bit at your different partnerships. I don't know whether you want to talk to that and take probably one of your elements, whether it's the precinct plans or whether it's the gender-based violence, and maybe we can draw that out. So you basically at local government, and that's basically that's Tshwane municipality, right? Or city of Tshwane rather, your COT. What are the partners you're working with? What are the line departments between the municipality that currently collaborate either around GBV or around the precinct plan? Maybe you can enlighten us there a little bit.
Okay, it will be our community and social development. But yeah, it's actually all the line function departments. But I don't know, economic development department. So economic development, city planning, social development, transport.
That's excellent, yeah.
Yeah, and there'll be others as well, depending on the type of interventions and things. So other partnerships that the city has, we have partnerships with universities. For instance, the substance abuse program, there's a partnership with University of Pretoria. We also have a partnership with the University of South Africa, and they conduct our biannual resident surveys. So that, and one of the things that is monitored is perceptions of safety and satisfaction with policing and safety services in the city. So yeah, partnerships with universities. And yeah, then there's partnerships with various NGOs, and that is particularly with our health and social development departments, relating to homelessness, substance abuse, and so forth. Private sector as well, especially the city improvement districts, that is quite important in some of the precincts. And then obviously provincial government, it's mainly our Department of Community Safety, and then Department of Education for the school safety. Okay. And national government, yeah, through the USRG, it'll be SALGA and so forth, the Civilian Secretariat, etc.
Excellent. Great. So I think what you describe, Charmaine, is a nice cross-sector of the municipality. Then within the municipality, it seems that you got a coordinating structure that works particular around either a topic or an area approach with your precinct plans. Then you got partners from the tertiary institutions that cover your monitoring. That's brilliant. And then you got CSOs, particularly in the health and health sector and social development. You got the private sectors through the city improvement districts, and then province and national as well. That's wonderful. What is your feedback loop to the communities that you work with? Are there focus groups or forums where you feed it back to a particular structure?
There are different forums. I think I must also say with our political volatility, we were struggling with our community safety forums for the last few years. You know, it was a lockdown and then a lot of changes. But yeah, we're making our progress on re-establishing that. So for now, there are different mechanisms. We have regional councillor forums, where safety issues are discussed, CPFs, and then the ward councillor the ward committees. So we've been using those different forums for now, while we're building up to re-establishing our community safety forums.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
That's
and
also-
then,
Yeah.
sorry, I also want to say that there's also the local drug action committee, the LDACs.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for that, Pumla. Thanks very much for that honesty. Yes, we always have some issues with establishing and challenges, but it's good to be open about it and see how can we improve, how can we learn from each other. Charmaine, last question from my side, and thanks very much for being that open and transparent. Is how do you monitor? So you said already that through University of Pretoria and through UNISA, you were able to have partners that do regular surveys. But what are you monitoring and how do you monitor it?
So we monitor different information. So with the substance abuse program, obviously they will monitor through the partnership with University of Pretoria on success rates of rehabilitation programs. And obviously we know that substance abuse is a tough thing to tackle, especially people using opioid substances. But anyway, that's monitored. We monitor the perception, public perceptions relating to safety, policing services, bylaw enforcement services, and so forth, on a biannual basis. So we can determine, what the community's perceptions are, as well as the qualitative information on what the community would like to see. And then obviously we do have the SAPS crime statistics. So that is that is used. And of course, the Urban Safety Reference Group publication provides a comparative analysis of crime rates per 100,000 population on a metro level. So those statistics help us quite a lot. For now, we've started our biggest safety audit project at the moment with the public employment program. So for now, we can't say it's monitoring and evaluation, but at least our current safety audits will provide some sort of baseline that we can compare with, after, let's say, a 5-year period, to see has there been any kind of impact in terms of the plans that were formulated, implemented, and so forth. So yeah, that we're just starting off with this process. We did a small pilot with about 30 public employment program participants, but this year we have 350 PEPs doing safety audits throughout the city. So yeah, like I said, that will be a baseline for us.
This is wonderful. It's excellent. What you described. So what you described is even in your monitoring system, you target it to the various levels, to the levels of an individual, like with your success rate on rehabilitation. That's obviously on the individual level. You get a number of how many people, so that's on that scale. But then also in the perception surveys on safety and policing and law enforcement, you're going on to neighbor, you can basically extrapolate neighborhood data, but you can also combine it to city level, which is great. You're using the SAPS, the Urban Reference Safety Reference Group, gives you almost like an annual spotlight for the whole area, and the safety audits again, neighborhood and city as well. So I think that's a very good example what you're describing here of various levels of intervention, but also monitoring and evaluation of that. So that's great. So you seem to have put up the structures. So you're on a good way to the collective impact, if I may say so. Congratulations, Charmaine. Any last word from you?
Sure, Michael. Sometimes I don't feel like we even 1% where we should be, but we are trying. And I often just say, just try and work with what you have. As much as Tshwane is a large metro, we don't have a safety unit. It's just a passion of some colleagues trying to get this underway. But yeah, don't give up and don't be intimidated.
I think you're a good example also that without any prep, you stood up and you said, I'm taking the challenge. So the challenge to everybody else, you missed out. Charmaine has been able to market City of Tshwane to all of us across the country and sparked certainly in the team that sits around with me around the table, a lot of excitement, a lot of possibilities and positive nodding. And I can see it in the comments as well, that people are actually congratulating the work that you are doing. You emphasize the partnerships as well, so that collective ownership is so important. Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our session today. Let me put on the camera again. I would like to open the floor for 1 or 2 comments before I then ask you, Ugeshni, to give me a little bit of or give us a little bit of an appetizer for what comes next week, when Ugeshni from SALGA will take us through a process as well of the institutionalization and how does public sector respond to that. So are there any, I would encourage a couple of comments. Charmaine, there's a whole lot of questions for you in the chat. I don't know whether you would like to respond to them. It's around the structures. Okay, you're doing that already via the chat. Thank you very much.
I think also just what I wanted to say is one of the things we're looking at is we did terms of reference for our community safety forum. And I know that, it's always been that the MMCs would chair these meetings, but at one stage, the volatility is so bad that we've asked that the chairpersonship be given to administration. So we'd involve ward councillors and so forth in the CSF, but that municipal officials take charge of convening and coordinating the CSF meetings. Because, yeah, like I said, I don't know if it's all the I don't know who's here from all the different municipalities, but the work has to go on. And unfortunately, if there's so many changes, it becomes difficult just to brief a new MMC, bring them on board, arrange a CSF, by which time you have a new MMC. So yeah, that's one of the things we did, is to draw up terms of reference, which we sent to our mayoral committee, and they were approved. So now it's just been a matter of delegation so that we can have a delegation done for the chairperson and secretariat, and hopefully, if all goes well, it will proceed.
I think you're touching on a very important point, and that's the what is the mandate of everybody involved? And I think we're struggling sometimes here in our lovely country that what's the role of the administration? What's the role of the politicians? So I think it's very good what you do, very strategic what you're doing there. So good luck with that and all the best for that. But it's a topic on its own, actually, to talk about that. Who is who? I see that Pumla raised her hand. Pumla, over to you.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, colleagues. Just the last point by Charmaine around the actual coordination of the structure. The administration is fine, but remember, at the hem of the structure, there should be an MMC, because whatever we raised in a CSF, ultimately, the municipality must implement some of the interventions that we're likely to suggest. And if there's no MMC who's chairing that structure, we will continue to speak amongst ourselves without anyone taking ownership of that, which is what I said. Until and unless there's political commitment to the entire implementation of the policy itself, we will continue to have CSFs that are established, but they will not be functional. So for as long as really there is political instability, we're going to continue to have challenges, and yet all the issues that they must deal with are exactly the same issues where I know in my province, we almost always have service delivery protests abound. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pumla. I can hear that you speak from experience, and I'm sure things will become better if we look for that collective impact and we work together jointly. So I would really like to thank everybody for sticking with us around for the last 2 sessions, and would like to call on Yugeshni to give us a sneak preview on next week. Yugeshni, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. I just put on my camera for a wee bit. So I am load shedding, so I apologize because I'm just going to switch on to say hi, and then that's part of the sneak preview. But I think Charmaine's also assisted in giving a sneak preview because she's also part of next week's session, but obviously focusing a lot more on the role that intermediaries play, and especially specifically in terms of local government, that role that local government plays from a community safety perspective as well. And yeah, I'm actually looking forward to the engagement. I'm looking forward to also sharing some insights and learning from the colleagues on the platform. So thank you, Michael. I'm looking forward to next week.
Thank you very much, Yugeshni, and I hand back to Fiona.
I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and just to remind you that next week we'll have the 3rd Sprint 2 training workshop on the 26th, and it will focus on the role of local government and local intermediaries. And Yugeshni will be joining us from SAGA, and Johanna from VCP GIZ. So next week, on the 26th, we'll meet once more. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, and thank you for the interaction. We will see each other next week.